Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our post-legislative session town hall hosted by the ACLU of Florida. My name is Maya Brown. I'm a political consultant here in Florida. I'm working to advance the policies and values that we all agree on to create a better place for a better state and a better place for us to all live, work, and play. I am so excited to be joined by this dynamic panel of women who are killing it in Florida and making sure that we have strong allies and accomplices in Florida's capital, making sure that the issues that we care about, that we have folks on our side who are advancing our causes. So we're going to dig deep into kind of what happened this past legislative session, what were our wins, where did we miss the mark, or where did the legislators miss the mark on making sure that Florida was a great place to be and really dive in. We're really excited to have you all joining in the conversation. So please drop your questions in the chat and we'll make sure that this dynamic panel is able to respond to those and get those questions answered. But we will kick off by just going around and letting these ladies introduce themselves. So I'm going to go in order by the way they show up here on my screen. So we're going to kick it over to Ms. V Eskamani to introduce herself shortly and briefly. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. What an honor to be here virtually with so many rock star women and femmes that I have the honor of fighting the good fight in the Capitol. My name is V Eskamani. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I represent several grassroots progressive organizations in the legislature, including Florida Rising and Florida Immigrant Coalition, and work in coalition with all these groups. And it's great to be here.
Thank you. Okay, Miss Melanie Williams, how are you? Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm doing well. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here, rather, amongst you all. So my name is Melanie Andrade Williams, and I am the legislative manager for the Florida Alliance of Planned Parenthood affiliates. And I'm excited to be here. I love advocacy. I love reading, researching, and talking about policy. So good to be here.
Thank you. And we have a lot to talk about specifically, about the attacks that happen to folks with wombs and folks who are able to have children, or the decision to make that decision unilaterally. So excited to dig into that with you today. Cara Gross from ACLU, please introduce yourself. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be here with all of you. So just thank you for joining me and for being here. I am the Legislative Director and Senior Policy Counsel for the ACLU of Florida, and I direct our legislative program at the Capitol. We focus on voting rights and civil rights and immigration and criminal justice and reproductive justice and LGBTQ rights and free speech. So all the issues that were gravely under attack this session. So very happy to be able to discuss those with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. And then last but not least, we are joined by Ms. Arlee Cologne. Please introduce yourself. Thanks so much for being here.
Of course, and thank you so much for having me. As always, it is an honor and a privilege to share space with all of you incredible folks. My name is Arlee Cologne. My pronouns are she, they, ella, and I am the Florida State Policy Advocate for the Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice Florida.
Thank you. And big ups to ACLU for continuing to provide space for conversations like this with a diverse panel like this through her lens, absolutely, but also the diversity of race and genders and pronouns and all those things. I'm just really excited about what we're going to accomplish during this discussion this evening. So if y'all don't mind, we're going to hop right into it, right? We were just talking before we went live about the fact that we have to go back into legislative session in a couple weeks, but we still need to mourn, I think for in large part, kind of what happened over the past couple months in Tallahassee. And I think it's specifically important for this conversation to really put up that lens of what it's like for folks who identify as women, how this session specifically impacted us, right? And so really kind of let's just go around the horn quickly and feel free to jump in. Like, what was this session like? How would you summarize this past legislative session? And I'll let whoever wants to start kick us off.
I can jump in here. I feel like I'm the newest at the table. I mean, I was involved in session years ago, but I took a 5-year hiatus. I would summarize this past session as warfare. I mean, we were in combat, and I think that we're all soldiers, and we took, we lost some battles.
Yeah, I think, Kara, you unmuted yourself. Anything to add to that?
Yeah. I just to add to that too. I mean, this was really the worst legislative session that I recall. I've been here for 5 years now, and every year it's bad, and I think that this is the worst. This is the worst, but they just keep outdoing themselves. Just the sheer amount of attacks on so many different areas of our civil rights and civil liberties. It made it, so difficult because there wasn't just sort of one area that they were attacking, right? It was all of our civil rights and civil liberties. It was all of us, and it was all Floridians. And, that's what made it so difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, it was hard to both be a part of it with not only the attacks on our civil liberties and our civil rights, we have this impending issue with redistricting, right? And what does that also look like relative to representative government and making sure we can elect folks who are going to fight for us in Tallahassee?
Yeah. I'm
Yeah,
so sorry,
go ahead,
Mike. Yeah, thank you. If I could add, there were so many missed opportunities this legislative session and so many crises that were intentionally ignored by legislative leadership. You ask anybody in the state of Florida what issues matter, they're going to say housing, they're going to say healthcare, they're going to say childcare. And yet, what did we see? We saw an assault on bodily autonomy, we saw an assault on the most marginalized people, and a complete failure of leadership. And these things are all designed to divide, distract, disenchant Floridians and keep Floridians downtrodden, right? The current status quo can thrive as long as folks are still struggling to pay their bills because they can't get involved civically, right? The status quo will stay in power when folks look at government and say, wow, they do not serve me. Why even bother voting, right? And so I think it's really important that we talk about the really good policies too that were ignored, as well as what was moved forward, to remind people that it doesn't matter who is in power, right? We can make a difference in this. But overall, I have to say, just, there's also this narrative that, corporations are, don't run the legislature. I have receipts, y'all. The monopoly utility companies, corporate landlords, puppy mills, theme parks, big tech, nursing homes, big box realtors like Walmart, private prisons, they can all claim victory this session. They all did very well this session. And the folks who did not are those struggling to pay rent, those facing rising property insurance crisis, those who are uninsured. And so just a very disappointing session based on all these missed opportunities and just complete abdication of leadership for more corporate profits and future political ambitions.
Yeah, and if I could just add too, like even the name of this event through her lens, like we're all people who are impacted by these disastrous legislations that were passed. And most of us were there on the forefront every single day. So it's not only a session where we're advocating for the people we represent, we're also representing ourselves. So it's definitely personal. I think that was like a big theme this session was, oh, don't make it personal. But it is personal. These are our lives, the lives of Floridians that are being impacted. So when you're in the forefront of these situations in this bad legislative session, it's definitely hard not to take it personal. Like, we're all here trying to make Florida work for Floridians and does not want to work for Floridians. So it's definitely draining. It's definitely heartbreaking, disheartening, but being in these spaces, it definitely gives you, the hope and the courage to keep moving forward, especially when you have these incredible, as Ida likes to say, tender warriors to keep fighting alongside.
100%. And I think, Arlee, you mentioned something that's very important to name, right? Like a lot of us come to this work because politics is deeply personal, right? A lot of these folks are making decisions that impact our day-to-day lives and have no idea what it's like to menstruate, no idea what it's like to make the really personal decision about, having an abortion. But we need folks like all of you all who are on the front lines in Florida's capital to push back and say, we're uplifting and amplifying, providing space for folks to share their own personal testimonies in spite of corporations or folks who are doing this for profit, right? Like, and there is specific receipts, as Ida said earlier, that these folks are doing this. This is a job. They clock in, they clock out. But for a lot of us in this work, and particularly on this call, like this is a 24/7 job because our communities rely on folks like us to make sure that we continue our advocacy. And in that particular vein, I want to dive a little bit deeper, if we can, about what specific bills that were passed this legislative session that pose significant threats and harm to Floridians' rights. And so, oh my goodness, I'm so excited. Big fangirl moment. We just was joined by Miss Pamela Burchford. Thank you so much for being here. We got started in our conversation already, but we were going to begin our discussion about specific legislation that directly impacted and caused harm to Floridians. But before we do that, we'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us about the work that you do.
Thank you so much, Maya, and good evening to my fellow panelists and my comrades. And of course, to the viewing audience, I apologize for joining you late, but this is such an important discussion that I wouldn't dare miss it. I am Pamela Burchford, and I've participated in legislative affairs for many years, having worked at the Florida Senate for about 16 years, and I've been maintaining a legislative and government affairs practice for some 27 years. So for those of you who are doing the math, this was my 43rd legislative session. And that is something that I question frequently. But I currently serve as the legislative strategic consultant to ACLU Florida, and it is my greatest pleasure to work with them and to all these ladies on this panel.
Thank you so much for being here. I am Pamela's biggest fan, and so glad that she was able to join us and continue to shed light and her wisdom on all the work that she does and continues to do in Florida's capital. But let's dive into the discussion. We'll take a look specifically at Pamela and Cara to talk about what specific legislation did you all fight on the front lines to make sure that Floridians were protected from the attacks on our civil liberties and rights.
I guess I'll just jump in. And first of all, I thought that I was the biggest fan, but it sounds like we're all the biggest fan of Pamela. So, and I'm so glad you're able to join us. Thank you. Gosh, it's hard to know where to start with the bills because there were just so many. And I also wanted to mention that we didn't talk about this before, but the rhetoric also at the Capitol this session was just so much harsher and horrible than we've seen before too. And that took place in all of the bills that we'll talk about today, the way that people were talking about. We're talking about these issues and the people who are impacted by these issues. It was, very, very disturbing and troubling. But so speaking of disturbing and troubling, I guess the first bill that I will talk about is HB 7. So I'm sure most everybody here knows, but HB 7 is the government censorship of race and gender discussions bill. It bans discussions of race and gender in public schools, in universities, in colleges, and also in private employment situations, and also for public employers. So it pretty much just bans what people can talk about in these spaces. And this is incredibly troubling. The government shouldn't be banning conversations about race and gender. The government has no reason, ability, or constitutional capability to ban discussions about race and gender. These are what teachers are teaching about, what students are learning about. Students have a right to learn an inclusive and accurate version of their history. And the governor with this bill is trying to prevent those very discussions. And, it's disturbing because not only is it in our schools, right? So it's happening in our schools, it's preventing this education, but it's also happening in the workforce. So it would ban diversity and equity and inclusion trainings or any trainings that try and teach their employees to have more diverse workforces and to embrace difference and to have more empathy. And it would ban discussions that would make workplaces more humane places to work. And that's the whole point of the bill. It also creates a cause of action that would allow any employer who, allow any employee who is uncomfortable about a training or a discussion in the workplace about gender or race or equity. If they are uncomfortable about that, it creates a private cause of action for them to bring a lawsuit against that private employer or that public employer. And it expands our Florida Civil Rights Act. So right now, Florida Civil Rights Act, it prohibits discrimination against protected categories, race, gender, things that we all know about. This expands that and says not only does the Florida Civil Rights Act prevent discrimination for gender discrimination and race discrimination, but it also it prevents trainings about discrimination and about gender discrimination and about race relations. And it allows employees to sue their employers. And, you know, this is an affront to our First Amendment rights and free speech. It will chill employers and chill schools and chill universities from being able to feel comfortable presenting accurate and inclusive information to their students and to their workforce. And so it is very problematic on several reasons. And I'll stop there so everybody else has a time to talk about everything, but I'm happy to come back to it.
Thank you. Pamela, do you have anything else to add specifically about HB 7 and how its impact is going? We're going to feel the reverb from that for a while.
I think Kara captured it pretty accurately. It is something that we will feel the pain of as we move forward. I think it's going to be not only problematic, you know, in the classroom, but it is going to be extremely problematic in our business world. And I think that we will soon see, you know, legal actions that may result from the implementation of this act.
Thank you. And I appreciate you all both amplifying the impact on the business community. I think we heard a lot about the context of this bill just in context of the classroom. And certainly am hopeful that we can continue to educate our community about what this is going to look like and how we ensure that we have allies who are, you know, business owners to continue to push back on harmful legislation like this. But want to pivot and talk specifically, again, harking back to the title of this particular panel through her lens, about the direct and deliberate attacks on abortion. And looking at Melanie, would really love to hear like your comments and tell us a little bit about HB 5, what the bill's impact will be, and the work that Planned Parenthood did and others to push back on that type of legislation.
Thank you so much, Maya. And I want to thank you all for that explanation of HB 7 as well. The details are so important. I know we hear a lot of generalizations of it, but getting into the weeds and saying all these different angles, I feel like it's so crucial. With HB 5, which is the abortion ban bill, the 15-week abortion ban bill, actually before session began last year during the preliminary committee meetings, there was a extreme abortion ban. Well, this one is extreme as well, but there was a 6-week abortion ban bill filed, HB 167. And, you know, in the wake of Texas's bill being passed and actually going into effect, that looked like something that was so extreme. Where can we compromise? And I think that we definitely knew that this was kind of coming down the pipeline because it did look like a more moderate version. But at the end of the day, it is a bill that effectively bans abortion. As it stands, this bill is completely unconstitutional. So as many of us already know, with the passing of Roe v. Wade in 73, excuse me, it says that, we have that fundamental right to an abortion. It's our choice to choose whether or not we want to have an abortion until our fetus is viable. So passing an abortion ban before you reach that level of viability in itself is against the law. So that's why we see those challenges happen in court after something like that passes. So Mississippi has a 15-week abortion ban that is not in effect yet, because it's being argued in front of the it's being reviewed by the United States Supreme Court. And so when we questioned the bill sponsors, this bill is unconstitutional. Like, if this goes into effect, that can open up our state to litigation. What's the reason of pushing legislation that's not even legal? Oh, well, we think that the Supreme Court is going to uphold Mississippi's 15-week abortion ban. So we want to go ahead and, basically, we want to go ahead and get our abortion ban in now while we watch what's happening on the federal front. So, 15 weeks, I talked to some people and they don't understand the severity of that. I think that the reason is really none of our business, right? It's the pregnant person's business. It's really their choice what they want to do with their pregnancy. However, there are some extreme cases that I think people couldn't even realize until you hear the stories. So we've had abortion throughout session. We had abortion providers to come and speak at the Capitol during committee hearings, but also to speak at press conferences. And one of the stories that really stuck with me, and I think kind of haunted a lot of us, was about an 11-year-old girl who was raped and didn't realize she was pregnant until well after 15 weeks. I think that's just one example of how life's circumstances puts people in a situation where they have to make that decision. And while it's a tough decision, it is a decision that should be made by the pregnant person and not by politicians. So that was really our fight for session. We organized to have doctors, providers, actual people who have had to make the decision to have an abortion, no matter what the reasoning. So I think those stories, the data, the research on who an abortion ban is going to affect the most, or who's going to have the most negative impact, rather, because this does impact everyone. But the people that would be the most negatively impacted are, always the people who don't have access to things, who don't have access to basic care, to basic resources. So the Black and brown communities throughout Florida, the poor communities throughout Florida, people that can't just get a flight to another state if they need this care, people that can't just drive, multiple states north or west or whatever have you to access this care. Those would be the people the most impacted. Now, the bill also does, because keep in mind now, when you look up HB 5, the name of the bill is very misleading. The bill also does actually create an annual appropriations to Florida's Healthy Start coalitions to either expand existing fetal and infant mortality review committees or to create them. So not every county throughout the state has one yet. And so what those committees would do would look deeper into fetal and infant mortality, look at the rates, look at the reasoning behind every case. So they would be the ones doing the research. It would theoretically be, locally driven and local leaders in the field doing that research and figuring out some best practices to try to change the course of what those statistics are currently looking like. But, women of color and babies of color are, of course, 2 and 3 times more likely to die during this whole process of conceiving, pregnancy, laboring, and delivery. So it's something that is important, but it's disingenuous being added to an abortion ban bill, because this bill could have been its own standalone bill. I think that there's no argument that it's important in a public health frame of mind to address those critical issues, but to put it on an abortion ban bill was just disingenuous. We've had birth justice groups and Black women and Black people-led groups pushing for policy change and reform, focusing on maternal and fetal health. And as we can see, those calls have been largely unanswered. And so to see it combined with an abortion ban was definitely, as through her lens, watching this play out, it was I mean, it was infuriating, it was devastating, and it was just something that, you know, for people like us is like, this is why I'm here. And it lights that fire. And it's like, okay, I need to be here. I need to be exposing these people that are filing horrible legislation and, you know, saying the most ridiculous things in their public hearings and getting away with it. Like, it kind of just fuels you to keep going. But the bill now is waiting to be sent to the governor and to be signed. So it does look like it's going to be signed into law.
Well, Melanie, thank you so much for such an in-depth analysis of this really harmful legislation. And you said something that I want folks to really sit with, right? Like, abortion bans don't stop abortions, right? Like, it actually exacerbates the amount of unsafe abortions, right? The fact that folks are going to have to travel out of state to find access to safe abortions actually increases as well, but it disproportionately impacts Black and brown and low-income women. And I need, you know, folks to understand that this legislation, again, doesn't stop that type of, don't stop those decisions from being made. And also the lens that this policy issue is one that's a social issue when abortion is really healthcare, right? And if we need to begin to think about that through her lens, right, like of this decision being a healthcare decision, I think folks will take that into account. But as Ida mentioned earlier, folks in Tallahassee don't care about healthcare and don't care about housing and the issues that are really impacting us right now, right? And especially these same folks who are in power in Tallahassee, who claim that they love small government, that they want government out of their decisions, but they're the main ones weighing in on what women can do with their bodies. So we have a lot that we have to do as women in our advocacy, to push back. We can do that both in August and in November at the ballot box. So thank you, Melanie, for uplifting that. Really kind of want to, Pamela, I saw you come off mute. You want to jump in?
Yeah, I really just want to highlight one other lens for this bill that I found just too cruel for me to even think about. This bill does address fetal anomalies, but what I found out during the great testimony from doctors and women on this bill is that in many instances, if you are assigned to a geneticist, you have a high-risk pregnancy, you don't even know whether you have a fetal anomaly until you are 20 weeks old. That's when they perform those critical tests that identify those unusual features of high-risk pregnancies. I simply cannot imagine a woman, a family, having to deal with a 15-week ban, but not even having access to determine the information until perhaps 20 weeks. That is simply cruel.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I do apologize for not even realizing or remembering to add that. But with that, I want the audience to be clear that it's not, you know, just any anomaly. It's actually, it has to be a fatal fetal abnormality. And 2 doctors have to certify first in writing before you have access to an abortion if you choose. And death has to be imminent. So if you're told by doctors that you're once born, like your baby would need a transplant or they would maybe only live for a year or 2, that's not considered imminent, or rather imminent is subjective. So it would put that family through a lot of turmoil, stress, and it's just cruel. Like you said, it is cruel.
It really is. There's one politician, a good friend of mine, who says this often. She's like, cruelty is the point, right? Like, and we have to make sure that we continue to highlight that that's what these folks go up there to do, to protect their own self-interest. And in that vein, they're harming us and the folks, everyday folks in Florida in the process. So I want to pivot quickly to voting rights, right? We actually had a really big win, what came back from the courts on SB 90. So would love to hear just a little bit about that. If folks can amplify and highlight that win, that would be really great for folks who are listening.
Yes, we did have a great win. this was part of what I was focused on during this legislative session. We had a 3-week trial that began on January 31st, right after session started. So I was watching the virtual trial with one eye and session with the other. So you can imagine the cruelty that I was going through. But we did have a great win. Many people remember Senate Bill 90 from the 2021 session. It namely, reduced the use of drop boxes. It made changes to the vote by mail ballots. And it did not allow for certain activities that we assist voters with when they're in line. We call that line warming. So that was a part of the 2021 bill. During this 3-week trial, which was held in federal court here in Tallahassee, we had a big win. Judge Walker basically spent an enormous amount of time in his order digesting the intentional discrimination that has been conducted in the state of Florida. That is a very difficult thing to present legally. We're pulling bits and pieces of things that are happening and trying to convey to a court that over a period of time, folks have been targeted. And the judge definitely agreed that Black voters over decades have been targeted with the suppression of their vote. And their inability to have an enhanced voting experience. So having this order that actually includes the history of this discrimination was very poignant in this order. We were fortunate to have 4 legislators to testify in that trial for us. Our esteemed great representative, Anna Eskamani, provided testimony. Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith, Representative Geraldine Thompson, and Senator Gary Farmer. And their testimony was unique because it highlighted their constant attempts to change and modify a bill as it went through, and the lack of response that they received from a personal conversation with a majority member of the legislature, with the chair of the committee, with members on the committee, with presiding officers. And it helped us to lay out this very intent to engage these provisions of a bill that would have a negative impact on certain segments of the community. And it was necessary that we have these legislators participate with us to help us get that message and that story across. And we find ourselves storytelling in court. This is how voting occurs in some communities. This is what the disabled confronts when they are attempting to vote. So having this order will be very helpful to us. We are certain that it will be appealed, but there is dicta in the decision that we think that we'll be able to use in years to come. And while we were waiting for a decision in the Senate Bill 90 case, lo and behold, the legislature decides that they want to go even further and continue to change the administration of elections, which of course impacts our ability to cast a vote. So this bill, more so than the actual act of voting, changed the actual administration, the duties and responsibilities that the SOE may engage in preparation for voting. The highlight of this bill that we spent a lot of time modifying and actually hoping that we could eliminate from the bill created an Office of Elections, Crime, and Security. And we now have everybody in the world monitoring and investigating election discrepancies and something called election irregularities, which we don't really know what election irregularities are. We know what violations of the law could be, but not irregularities. And it allows for this office to be created in the Secretary of State's office. It also designates special election officers in regional offices of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. So in addition to your state attorney and the staff in the state secretary's office and sheriffs and police chiefs, everybody can now investigate an election irregularity and an election law violation. The bill also increases penalties. Right now, it increases from a $1,000 annual cap to $50,000 of an annual cap for third-party voter registration organizations that fail to deliver the registration applications in a timely way. Today, you have 14 days to deliver those applications, but if you're a day late, your organization could be facing a fine of $50,000. And of course, organization also includes a person. So people who just decide they want to go and help register folks to vote and it's not their family could also be facing these fines. It increases the frequency with which we do what we call list maintenance. Currently, in odd years, our local supervisors of elections survey the voter rolls, and individuals are removed if they're deceased or no longer living in the state, have created felonious crimes. They can be removed from the list. And we have had many issues with what we call voter purges in the past. Now we have these list maintenance reviews annually. And so the bottom line is that we'll be removing more and more people from the voter rolls. So we're going to have to be more focused on our review of voter registration processes and with these lists. It requires an inactive voter to confirm his or her legal address before they can be re-added to the voter rolls. In past elections, our supervisors have had access to grants. There are a lot of organizations and entities that provide grants to help with voter education, voter registration, and just general outreach. And that has been a premium for local supervisors because the legislature changes these laws so frequently. I mean, you have to really spend time and outreach educating local voters in the process of voting. But now this bill eliminates any private donations that may be available to a supervisor's office to do anything. The voter education, the outreach, the voter registration, and certainly specifically not litigation. So we thought that was very harmful to voters because we depend so heavily on local supervisors to provide that education. Fortunately for us, so many of our organizations have really stepped up their game in terms of participating with our community and educating our community, which is why we had such a successful election in 2020. This bill requires, it revises the date that you have to request help in voting and what we call supervised voting, generally in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. An administrator can request assistance from the local SOE to come in to distribute ballots and help patients exercise their right to vote. Today, you have to make that request 21 days in advance, and now you have to make the request 28 days in advance. So this bill does a number of things, again, requiring the supervisor of elections to engage in a manner that it may have access on our ability to get to that ballot and cast the vote. One thing that sort of crossed over from Senate Bill 90 into 524 was a provision relating disclaimer. In the Senate Bill 90 Act, a third-party registrant had to tell the prospective voter that, well, we may not get this information to the supervisor in advance, so you may not want to give it to us. You may want to file it yourself, or you may want to go online and pursue it. So it put those who register others to vote in this unusual position of not getting an application completed, or not telling the truth, because the effort is always obviously to turn these in at the correct time within that 14-day time period. The 524 bill indicated that you no longer had to verbalize this disclaimer, and it would now be printed on the voter application form. That was a part of the Senate Bill 90 trial. And was considered moot given the action of 524. So again, the legislature has taken great effort to impact our right to vote, our right to elect individuals of our choice.
Thank you so much, Pamela. And yes, we were talking before we hopped on about, how this past legislative session is going to have a direct correlation and impact on the elections of the primary and November elections, but particularly how folks actually show up, right? I was joking on another call that the 524 bill should be called the ballot blocking bill, right? Because it's actually impacting how folks are able to, one, access the ballot and return, especially vote by mail ballots back in. But would also love to hear, Arlee, we haven't heard a lot from you this evening. And before we jump to you, want to remind folks that if you're watching and you have questions, please drop those in the comments in the chat. We want to make sure that we're able to get to your questions as well. But Arlee, talk about the work that you all were doing this past legislative session, either on voting rights or any other issues, before we jump to audience questions.
Yeah, definitely. So at the Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice Florida, we're very much working in coalition with all of the orgs that are here. So that ranges from doing local preemption work with Ida and her coalition, reproductive rights and justice work, criminal justice work, immigrant work. So we basically are just here to support and make sure that, language justice and immigrant justice, reproductive justice are always at the forefront at whatever the issues are. So that's kind of like the work that we have been doing, is making sure that folks are very much thinking of the folks that are always pushed to the margins, which all of these people on the call, either personally through their own identities or just through the work that they do, always make sure to center. So that's kind of the work that I've been doing with Latina Institute this legislative session, whether it was, talking about reproductive justice in terms of the abortion ban. Melanie touched upon this incredibly, which was, the co-opting of the language that was the name of this bill. the co-opting of birth justice and reproductive justice to center in reducing infant and fetal mortality, when it's incredibly disgraceful to do that when there's a maternal mortality crisis in the state of Florida. Talking about healthcare when Florida hasn't even expanded Medicaid. Like, there's just so many things that are always tossed to the side when these culture wars, as we like to talk about, come to the surface. So that's kind of definitely what Latina Institute's been doing. Same with the immigrant work with the Florida Immigrant Coalition, talking about House Bill 1355, which is the anti-immigrant proposal, which I'm sure Ida will touch upon later. You know, the intersections between anti-immigrant policies and its income and its like impacts on health outcomes, because we've seen in every single state that has enacted anti-immigrant policies that undocumented health outcomes negatively, you know, they're negatively impact. So just that's the kind of work that we've been doing in coalition with some of the incredible organizations that are on this call, and will continue to do to make sure that, you know, undocumented folks are uplifted, Latina folks are uplifted, as well as, you know, our Afro-Latinas, Afro-Latines, making sure that we're all centering the folks that are always pushed to the margin. So thank you for giving me this space to talk about that.
Thank you so much. And, you know, I think we talk a lot about all the bad things that happened in Tallahassee, because there was a lot, right? Like, we could go on and on and on talking about all the bad things and all the bad legislation through our lens as women on this call and the advocacy work that we do. But want to just go around the horn quickly. And, you know, if there was any dream legislation that you could pass in Tallahassee, what would it be? So I'm going to do just a fire, just round really quickly. I'm going to go to Cara quickly. What would be your dream legislation to pass?
Wow, my dream legislation. Okay, so really quickly. Well, there was an amazing bill that actually did pass the Senate this time, but it didn't move in the House, and this was Ava's Law, SB 630, and it was an amazing bill that would have made it so women who are in prison are now forced to give birth by themselves in prison, and it would have allowed them the humanity to be able to defer their sentence so that they could give birth at home with the people that they love and with their family and their support networks, and defer their sentence until after. And that just seemed like a no-brainer. I don't know anybody who didn't think that bill should pass, and the Senate passed it unanimously, and it was not heard in the House. So that is a bill that should definitely pass next session.
Awesome. Thanks for putting us on notice about that bill too. Ida, dream legislation. I think I know what it would be, but I want to hear it.
Well, I echo Kara with Ava's Law, and I'll also add, in the corporate accountability world, combined reporting is an amazing policy that would close corporate tax loopholes, stop accounting shenanigans by some of the most profitable corporations in Florida. It would generate the state $500 million a year that we are currently losing out on. That is wasteful spending. And actually, Representative Angie Nixon put an amendment forward to pass combined reporting in the state of Florida, and legislative leadership joined forces with the corporate lobby and stopped that amendment from passing. And so this is costing Floridians $500 million that could be right invested into our communities, not more corporate profits. And it would be an incredible win for Floridians. So the list is long, but I'm going to go with combined reporting.
Awesome. Thank you. Melanie, dream legislation, either that we already seen in Tallahassee or something new, a new bold idea.
Okay, yeah. I was gonna say I'm gonna go with a real bold idea, since we're talking about dreams, because I can't control my dreams. Anything happens in my dreams, y'all. Okay, so let me just shoot for the stars. But no, I'm learning and reading more about abolition, and I think we wouldn't need Ava's Law if we didn't keep putting our people in cages. At first, I thought the idea of abolition was ridiculous. Like, how can you get rid of jails and prisons? Where would the bad people go? But when you think about the reasons why we have crime, people are always trying to pinpoint them. And, oh, well, if people weren't poor, if people didn't need mental health services, if people didn't need food, if there weren't food deserts, then maybe we wouldn't have people to commit crime. So I think that the bill, wouldn't necessarily be a bill, but it would just be that combined effort to divest from our prisons. And I know there was something. I'm not sure. I wasn't able to follow those bills, Ida, so maybe you could speak more to that sometime. But I know there's some chattering about something dealing with the private prison. If we can get rid of the system that, like, when people go into it, they may not have been a bad person, right? They may not have committed a horrible crime or even a violent crime, but when they come back out, they're institutionalized and they don't get the services they need. And that's the system kind of creates, you know, that criminal mindset, I guess you could say. So I mean, I think that's the dream. It'd be nice, and I think it answers someone's question in the chat about, like, what would you work on if you could just do whatever. Like, that's a huge issue to me. I don't have family incarcerated or anything, but it just hits me here. But what I was initially going to say was just giving prisoners the right to vote. I just feel like they're incarcerated. That's what their sentence is. It's not all these other things that come with being incarcerated, like not voting.
Yeah, I mean, and, you know, take a look at all the work that many of us participated in. What was that, in 2018, to pass Amendment 4 to give returning citizens their right to vote back. And then the legislature, again, did something they had no business, to put forth an implementing bill to restrict that access of what we passed in a constitutional amendment, right? So absolutely, we have to continue to push and make sure the folks who have served their time are able to be welcomed back into our communities, to live thriving lives, right? And I won't get into my policy. I won't get in my policy pulpit about recidivism and things right now. But if you want to hear that, drop it in the chat, and I'll give you my thoughts. But Pamela, dream legislation, if you could do it in Tallahassee.
If I could do it in Tallahassee, I'd create fair congressional districts. We went through a redistricting session. You know, that is something that occurs every 10 years. And given that I've been here for 43 years, I've been doing redistricting since 1982. This session, because we passed what we know as Amendment 5 and 6, amendments in our Constitution that require districts be drawn not to favor or disfavor an incumbent or a political party, and the districts must be compact. We did that with the legislative districts. We successfully passed Senate districts and House districts, but when it came to the congressional districts, we got interference from an entity not involved in redistricting. Redistricting, per the Florida Constitution, is particularly a legislative function. But our governor decided that we should reduce minority participation in redistricting. So again, you're seeing intentional discrimination. You're seeing targeting of certain segments of our community, and it's reprehensible. Minorities, Black voters, and Hispanic voters should have the right to elect the representative of their choosing, and their voices have a right to be heard. But we don't seem to be able to construct a map that would allow that process to move forward. So in addition to election reform that we've been going through for the last 2 years, we have not had the opportunity to create congressional districts that fairly represent our population. So if I had to close my eyes and create that fair map, I'd do that.
Well, hopefully in a couple weeks when they go back up to Tallahassee that we can get that done. And the governor, who clearly wants to be a legislator and draw his own maps, will stay in his lane. You know, we can pass those fair maps and make sure that we have good representative congressional districts and a good map. So thank you. Ms. Cologne, your dream legislation, what would it be?
So this past legislative session, I had the incredible privilege and honor to work with Ashley Eubanks, who is one of the people leading Learning with Dignity, which is a bill to put menstrual hygiene products for free in school. And I think that that's just one of those, we talk about the things that Floridians need, and, menstrual hygiene products are incredibly expensive. And this would, give folks a lot of access in their schools to be able to, use menstrual products for free. And, this was coming off the tails of Dignity Powers bill. I forget what it was called, but it was something with dignity about getting people incarcerated to have menstrual products for free, because that was seen as, a luxury item when people who menstruate don't choose to menstruate. So that was kind of riding off the coattails of, well, this should also be in public schools for free. And I definitely think that that's the bare minimum of what we should be doing in the state of Florida, is making sure that students have access to menstrual products.
Awesome. Thank you. And taking a look here at the chat and in the comments, feel free if one person wants to just shout out an answer to this, so we can move through some of these questions as we near our closing time. Feel free to jump in. But there was a question from Elizabeth that said that, actually there were some bad bills this session that did not pass. Which of those bad bills or any others do we expect to come back next legislative session?
I can speak to that because I see she did bring up HB 747, and I was actually following that bill and did some analysis around it, looking at other states and other legislation. But I think that this is the medical consciousness bill, and I think the assumption is that, a doctor or a nurse, a healthcare provider shouldn't be forced to provide any service that violates their moral conscience. But what it really, that already exists, right? Like at the federal level, they have those protections. But what it really does in the state of Florida would be to expand those protections to healthcare payers, employers who provide your health insurance, and healthcare institutions. So when you look at the amount of Catholic health providers we have in the state, and in some of the rural areas in our state, that's giving a corporation a moral, saying that they can do the same thing a human can do, which is, I can't participate in this because it violates my conscience. I think it's just ridiculous. I mean, a corporate entity is not a person, and those protections already exist for our providers. So it's really not about protecting people, their faith or religion or whatever have you. Currently, we're not forcing doctors to give an abortion. That's not a thing. We're not forcing doctors to do things they don't want to do. But to pass something like this would be devastating to people in poor communities, people in rural communities who don't have multiple, they don't have multiple options when it comes to healthcare providers. I think that this is a bill that we need to look for in the future. It did make some movement in the beginning of session, but then died down after a couple of committees.
Thank you. And Arlee, I think you wanted to jump in on that too. Would love to hear your thoughts.
Yes, just even something that happened today. We saw Representative Randy Fine say that he wants to move forward something that we saw this past legislative session filed by Rep. Sabatini, which is a trans youth medical ban, which we've seen come out of Texas, where their governor put out an executive order basically claiming that moving forward with trans medical care is considered child abuse. So that's definitely something that I can see happening this upcoming legislative session, is attacks on the trans community, which we have seen in Florida before with the trans sports ban. So something continuing in that arena, which is unbearable to think, but definitely something that was, it always starts on Twitter, the things that happen for sessions. So that happened today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both for amplifying that and putting us on notice of what we need to be paying attention to. And my dog says hello. He did good this whole time. Usually Gino is on these chats, so we're proud that he was quiet this whole time. But also want to amplify all of the organizations that fought vigorously to push back on the Don't Say Gay bill. That's something that obviously got a lot of attention, and rightfully so. And we're going to continue to protect our LGBTQ community here in Florida, and stand with those as both allies and accomplices. But, we have a lot of work to do in Florida to continue to make this a great place for every Floridian, not just the wealthy few and for corporations, but for everyone to have an opportunity to thrive and grow and not just survive in Florida. But if you all could provide any final thoughts for folks who might, after hearing this segment, be thinking, what can I do to make a change in my state and in my community? Would love to give some inspirational words, some calls to action. I know all of us love those, to make sure that we can direct folks into ways that they can give back and push back on some of this harmful legislation. So just going to go around quickly to give some inspiring words for folks who are thinking about ways that through their own lens can show up and support our different and diverse communities. So going to start with Ms. Cologne. How can folks show up and either participate in your organization or give back in Florida?
Definitely. I definitely think with Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice, we definitely just want to support folks that are doing the work like on the ground. So that means abortion funds, that means doulas and birth workers, with the abortion ban. Abortion funds are definitely going to be the ones that are helping our folks who either have to go to North Carolina for abortion care after 15 weeks, because that's the closest state that will do so. So I think that practical care, which is what's super important right now, that's where folks should be putting if they have financial privilege. But if not, just like getting involved with organizations that you want to be your political home. It's not just about, you have to be passionate about the work that you want to do. So either if you have financial privilege, donate to abortion funds, or just get involved with an organization that meets your political home necessities.
Awesome, thank you. Ida, how can folks be inspired? Give them some words to move on.
Yeah, I'm going to get a little philosophical here, right? I mean, all of these assaults we've seen are strategic by the far right. We're seeing it across the country. It's linked to decades of work they've been doing, and it's all around making Floridians divided, distracted, disenchanted, and downtrodden. Their entire plan is to keep people oppressed, right? LGBTQ folks challenge what it means to live in this patriarchal society, right? They're unfettered by these standards. They challenge everything the status quo stands for. And so the right's conclusion is we must erase these people, right? And by doing so, we're also dividing Floridians around a very, politically contentious issue. We are weaponizing misunderstanding and fear instead of building compassion and understanding, right? And the key to beating the status quo is by building movements of intersections, multiracial movements, intergenerational movements, right? Coming together, getting more folks registered to vote, and lifting up our champions and the proactive policies that were ignored, and exposing corporate greed and holding those beholden to those special interests accountable. And through that process, I really do believe that we are in a dark ages right now, and there's a renaissance coming, but we have to work hard for it. And so I just really want to encourage folks, Florida Rising and Florida Immigrant Coalition, for example, are doing massive voter registration efforts to get people engaged in this process. There are so many good ideas and good policies that are not heard, that our champions are putting forth, but the party in power doesn't want to empower people. They want to stay in power. And so volunteer to register voters, educate folks on, the possibilities that are before us, and who we elect really does matter, and get educated, go to candidate forums as well, make those decisions that best suit the needs of your community, but get involved, whatever that means for you, get involved and get folks engaged in this electoral process.
Absolutely. Thank you. Pamela, you've been such a wealth of knowledge and wisdom tonight and for years. What can folks do to make sure that we're pushing back on what's going on in Tallahassee?
Be persistent, for one. You are going to have to show up. I guess given that I've been doing this for so long, I have to use the word persistence. But please continue to show up. That is one major factor in moving Florida forward. This was a very emotional session for me. In talking to people about the session, either during the session or after the session, and you're talking about all the bills that we've highlighted here tonight, you can see the confusion on their face. You can see the pain in their eyes. And sometimes it's just sheer terror. And people were finding it hard to believe how I was explaining the process of this session. And I just didn't have a lot of hopeful moments. Things were moving rapidly and in a very, as Ida said, a very predetermined way. They simply showed up, they knew what they were going to do, and they did it. Citizens had very little time to discuss an issue this year. Um, we had citizens removed from the committee rooms while they attempted to testify. Citizens were banned from the Capitol for a year, and we even had one arrest. And all of this is occurring in the People's House, our state capital. But we're going to have to bring change to Florida. And in order to do that, we have to be persistent. We have to show up. And I just want to say I'm so grateful for all these women on this panel tonight. They show up. And as much as they say I help them, they are always there to lift us up. And they do that every time I talk to them, every time I see them. It is a great collaboration for people in the state of Florida. These folks do show up for you. So let's all be persistent and please, please go vote.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Melanie.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure being here with you all. I think to get involved real quick, I'll just say you can go to plannedparenthood.org and click the link at the top that says action. You'll be able to fill out a contact form so that you can get plugged into your actual affiliate. Now, we are a part of a coalition as well called Floridians for Reproductive Freedom. If you go to floridareprofreedom.org, you can find out more about what our coalition actually does if you want to plug in more on the front fighting for abortion access as well as reproductive rights. As an organizer, as a community organizer and activist, there's always something to be done. So like Arlee said, like you have to plug into groups that really speak to you. For me, I'm constantly wanting to learn. This is the book I'm currently reading. Like there's always something to learn, whether you're enrolled in school or not. You can find free books, ebooks online. You can find books that speak to you and what you think is an issue. There's probably already an organization out there working towards an issue that you care about. So you got to plug in that way and just keep the faith, because this is hard work. It is challenging, but we need you in this space. So if you're thinking about it, this is a sign for you to just jump in.
Absolutely. Thank you. And last but not least, Cara, what can you give folks as a call to action, or what should they be doing to make sure that we're pushing back on what's going on in Tallahassee?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm really glad that we're ending on this because I think it's so important. Elections matter, right? I mean, the reason that these things are happening is because there are people that are in our legislature that are passing these things. And then there's a governor who is probably going to sign them all into law, or has already signed, in the case of the Don't Say Gay bill, has already signed that into law. And it's so important for everybody. I mean, everybody here who's watching is educating yourself, right? So we have legislators that are opposing these horrible bills. They are standing up, they are fighting, and we need to support those legislators that are trying to defeat these horrible attacks on our civil rights and liberties. And we have to make sure that we vote into office people who care about our civil rights and liberties, and that will vote their values and vote your values. And I think that is so important. And so, we do have elections coming in November, and just remember how much elections matter, and please register to vote.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much. It has been such a great honor to share virtual space with you all tonight and talk about the amazing work that you all are doing in Tallahassee and in local governments as well. We appreciate your advocacy, your fight, your wisdom that you're sharing with me and others who are listening through her lens. We know that this is not the beginning of your work, and nor is it the end. And I'm just so excited to watch and collaborate with you all to make better a Florida place for folks that we love. And the folks who look like us and who are us. So thank you all so much for tuning in to Through Her Lens, the post-legislative session hosted by ACLU of Florida. We do hope that you enjoyed tonight's session. All of the organizations that are represented on this call, they mentioned on how you could get involved. So certainly hoping that you do so, because we need more of us in this fight, because it's going to take all of us to free all of us, right? So thank you so much for being here. Thanks for having me as your moderator, and have a good evening, and stay engaged and become part of the movement. Take care, y'all.